All right, welcome everybody. How are you doing? Good, thank you. Welcome to this transformative panel session called Building Inclusive Cultures, Teams, Communities, and Ensuring Access and Representation. This is part of the 12th Denver Startup Week. We're extremely grateful to our sponsors. I'm gonna do some housekeeping things out of the way. Where's Okay, let's see. This way? There we go. Okay. Technical difficulties. So yes, let's start by thanking our title sponsors, Amazon, Capital One Cafe, Dell for Startups, and the Downtown Denver Partnership. And also thanks to our generous host here at Jake Jab Center. We're so grateful to be here. This by attending this session, you're agreeing to follow our code of conduct, as well as being photographed and recorded on video. So say hi to the camera because you're on cam. Also, be sure to share your experience in this session on all your online platforms, however you feel comfortable, and make sure to utilize our hashtags that we've included as part of the session. Now, without further ado, I am excited to talk about this session. This will serve as a beacon guiding us forward and towards a future where diversity is not just celebrated, but embedded in the very DNA of our cultures, teams, and communities. In a world of infinite possibilities, building inclusive environment is not just a goal, but it's an absolute necessity. The imperative for inclusivity is etched into the fabric of our times, and its significance has never been more pronounced. I am honored to stand before you to kickstart this discussion that's not just timely, but essential in today's entrepreneurial landscape. Now let's delve into the heart of today's session. My name is Jessica Acosta, and I have the privilege of serving as a moderator and presenter for this session today. As an entrepreneur and experienced business leader, I've had the incredible journey of founding leading organizations such as ECS and co-founding Top-Notch Compliance. However, one of my most cherished accomplishments has been funding Edifest 2120, a diversity-focused innovation tech hub right in the heart of Denver. Also, as a passionate advocate for entrepreneurship and innovation, I understand firsthand the challenges and opportunities for the startups and the opportunities that we face. That's why I created this session. I believe in the transformative power of diversity, access, and representation, and I'm excited to help entrepreneurs on their path to success. Today, we gather here not just as participants of this panel session, but as torchbearers for a pivotal moment. This group of remarkable panelists here each bring a wealth of experience and unique perspectives that will help us navigate the path towards a more inclusive future. Now, without further ado, let me introduce them. Here next to me, we have Andrea Perdomo. She's an entrepreneur and the director of portfolio advancement at Common Future. Next, we have Aimara. She's the Latina Tech Denver chapter leader and co-founder of Function Wellness. Right next to her, we have Frances Padilla, you guys changed spots, but that's okay. District Director of the Colorado District Office of Small Business Administration. Then we have Joelle Martinez, President and CEO of the Latino Leadership Institute. Then we have Diedra Garcia, Inclusive Contracting Program Manager at PCL Construction. Next to her, we have Anthony Graves, Managing Director of Partnerships at the University of Colorado, Denver. And last but not least, we have Chad Schneider, Business Development Officer at Huntington Bank. Let's give them all a round of applause for their willingness to be here. I know a lot of them had to switch schedules. They have a really busy schedules, but they were all willing to participate in this panel and share their knowledge. Before we dive into the discussion, I want to take a moment to thank Andrea Perdomo, here next to me, who was instrumental in helping me organize this session and very generously share her time, knowledge, and resources to make the planification of this panel seamless. That's what I call the power of collaboration. Thank you. As we embark on this session, remember that we're not just discussing inclusivity, we are shaping the future of our businesses, our communities, and our world. Let's take a stand for inclusivity, break down barriers, and build a future where every voice matters. Now let's dive into this transformative discussion and ignite the flames of change together. Okay, we'll start with some questions to begin with this first segment, understanding the power of diversity. And because we have a full panel here, I will select some people that will answer this question, and we'll get a chance to hear from everybody. So this question is directed to Chad and Diedra. And can you please tell us or share some specific tools or resources that have been particularly valuable promoting diversity and inclusion in your workplace or in your community? Who wants to start?
It'd be most ironic if the banker started. I offer you, but in an industry where we've seen both racism in many ways, either direct or through unconscious bias, since its inception, something that I've experienced. Not at Huntington, but as a first-generation Mexican-American, first-generation college graduate, I take a lot of pride in my heritage. And also being passively white, I've got to hear a lot. And so I think that part of, I've literally brought things up and then heard my boss tell me, I don't care about that crap. And so it's real in financial services. So what Huntington has done is bred a culture that doesn't accept that. And one of the ways we've done that is we've been very intentional about having diverse employees in managerial positions all the way at top across the bank, a diverse board of directors. Anthony Graves is actually on our regional board of directors, so it's great being up here with Anthony. We've also invested quite a lot in our business resource groups, which I've found really empowering, being the enterprise lead for the Hispanic Business Resource Group at Huntington. We've invested a tremendous amount of money and resources and empowerment in that. We've also created some continuous feedback groups or surveys, which I think are tremendously helpful, and I'd recommend to any business. So many businesses that we work with are so focused on getting continuous feedback or validation from their customers. I've seen a dozen CX or UX or whatever presentations, but how many businesses are really applying that same attention to the life journeys of their employees? That's really, at the end of the day, if you don't have employees to support your products and your operations, and those employees aren't happy and don't feel they have an opinion in the company, then why are we doing this? Do we not? It's important to show you care and to be part of a team. And I think that culture is what's fostered at Huntington and juxtaposed to past places I've worked over the years. It's been incredible. So, Diedra, please.
Diedra, I know that, and I selected you for a specific reason for this question because you and I share industries, and for you and your company, it's not just about providing access and making sure that we have inclusion within your company, but also since you deal with a lot of subcontractors and partners, it goes beyond your company. And so please tell us more about those specific tools and resources that your company have been implementing in providing awareness.
Yeah, thanks for the question, and thanks to Chad for jumping out there with the R word, because it's going to make what I have to say much easier. I was going to totally sugarcoat it. Now it's going to be nice and real. As Jessica said, I work for a construction company. I've been in the industry since the late 1990s, and so let me start by saying we've made tremendous strides. We've made tremendous strides. Today, I would say probably 5% of our workforce are female. And many of those with engineering degrees, advanced engineering degrees, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see them in positions of authority, having decision-making responsibilities over job sites. That said, we are notoriously white and male. We are also notoriously single-minded in our thinking, and I don't say that as a criticism, I say it as an observation. Construction is not the type of industry where you don't get a degree in dentistry and after 10 years being a dentist, you say, you know what, I feel like I want to be a superintendent on a commercial job site. That doesn't happen. People are raised in this industry. Their fathers teach them, their fathers taught them. And so what that means is we have a lot of people who have the same background, who have the same experience, who think the same way, and it's really difficult to introduce new ideas. And so this work is a challenge, but we're all trying to get there, right? And let me just add for those of you who have the ability to change, to influence corporations, what the market does dictates a lot of how we behave. And so when a private company says we value diversity and inclusion, guess what? We, as their vendors, also value diversity and inclusion. I'm sorry if that sounds too, pragmatic for you, but it's a reality. And we would respond to any other market influence, right? If people, want to build with mass timber instead of steel, we're going to respond to that, right? So think of it the same way. So that's helpful. That's the catalyst. We do all of the things. We have employee resource groups. We have events to celebrate people of color and women. We're doing something fun for Hispanic Heritage Month. We try to recruit from colleges and universities, and all of you should be having a little red flag go off in your mind right now when I say we're recruiting from colleges and universities, because not all people of color go to colleges and universities, but we try to recruit diversity from those sources. So we do all the things, and it's working definitely much more than it worked 10 years ago. That said, in my opinion, and by the way, this is my opinion, so it's not a popular one, so if anybody's going to throw stuff up here, have good aim. These people do not share my opinions. But what I'm also very committed to is building equity. And that is a difficult notion in an industry whose culture is a meritocracy. Everybody pulls themselves up by their bootstraps because their father did it and their father before them did it. And so what it tends to get interpreted as having a seat at the table. Well, in my opinion, it's not enough to have a seat at the table. Some people show up to the table hungry, poorly nourished, tired, single-parent families, having to work 2 jobs, extreme trauma in their past. Other people show up to the table fresh, well-nourished, 2-parent families, president of the debate team, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not enough to have a seat at the table. So in terms of diversity in an organization, I believe that we have to shore up the difference. If you understand engineering at all, if you have a system or a wall that's failing on one side, you don't shore up both sides equally. You shore up the side that's failing. And that's a difficult notion because to some people that's interpreted as we're giving them something and they have a hard time giving something. Well, in my opinion, if we're going to achieve equity, we've got to shore up the difference. We've got to give to those. And so that might look like we have to give opportunities. We might have to hire people who have skills like tenacity and perseverance and problem solving and conflict resolution in lieu of an engineering degree, because guess what? Not everybody's getting engineering degrees. And all of, at least in my industry, all the construction companies are fighting at the universities to hire the handful of minority students that are coming out of there. That, to me, doesn't feel sustainable if we're trying to achieve diversity.
Thank you. Yes, we appreciate your candid response and for not sugarcoating it, because I think part of the awareness and change is getting down to the real deal and sharing those candid responses. Now let's talk a little bit. We talked about tools and resources. Let's talk a little bit about strategies and innovation. And for this question, I have selected Anthony, Frances, and Joelle. Can you please share some strategies or initiatives that your organizations have implemented to ensure equitable access and representation for all, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds? Who would like to start?
Do you want to go local to federal? Let's do that.
Okay, I'll do that. That sounds great. Well, first, when you, Jessica, talk about like igniting the flame of change, I've always seen you for a long time as the match, and I'm happy to be one of your embers. So thank you for your leadership in pulling us together today, Jessica.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You know, I think when we think about innovation communities, right, and incubating a pipeline of tech founders and makers that are representative of communities that are not ordinarily at the table, it first starts with recognizing the disparity that Diedra is talking about. And so I want to talk for just a second about the disparity that we should all be called to combat and build new systems around to remedy the current situation. According to a McKinsey report about the amount of 2022 venture capital that was invested in underrepresented communities, only 1% of Black founders receive venture capital. Rather, only 1% of all the venture capital invested in 2022 went to Black founders. What would you think it is for Latino founders? What would you guess? Worse. About comparable, 1.5%. So of all of the venture capital invested, only 1.5%, according to McKinsey and Company, went to Latino founders, okay? Women, how much venture capital do you think women-led companies received in that same year in 2022?
A third of that.
1.9% for all women.
Okay.
1.9% for all women. And if you were a woman of color, so if you were a Latina or a Black female founder, you received only 0.1% of all venture capital that was placed in 2022.
And that's why the importance of this panel here.
that is the critical importance of this panel here. But it's also, it underscores the importance, right, of everybody thinking through not just Band-Aid solutions, right, fighting over the graduates, graduating engineering or CS majors or whatever else, but really thinking through systems of change that we can implement together, okay? So here at CU Denver, as the Managing Director of Partnerships and Innovation, I have a responsibility to start thinking through how we work with government, right, key industry leaders, and create a new culture here at the university that can mint a brand new pipeline of future tech founders and makers and of venture capitalists, right? Because 90% of all venture capitalists, people who are trained to go to school for finance or other things, to become in the elite ranks of VCs in the United States, 90% are white males. And so in order to really think through changes, you have to think through what the on-ramps will be for students at, say, CU Denver, where more than 50% of all students here identify as being a person of color, and about 50% are first-generation college students who have not likely grown up with a venture capitalist in their family, have not necessarily grown up with someone who understands user experience or has become a tech founder, right? And so we're deeply committed to that. The other thing is using the platforms that we control to raise awareness and invite partnerships for change. And so that's one of the fundamental things that we're doing. Last thing I'll say before kind of dropping the mic here is that we're also thinking a lot about the social supports for founders of color, right? We recognize that there are unique lived experiences, right, that many of us come from if you're an entrepreneur or you're trying to break into tech. And we also recognize that there is racism and discrimination, and there's barriers and trauma that you may have to navigate as a founder. And so here at CU Denver, We are aggressively pursuing grants and corporate investments to really think through creating a culture and environment that is supportive and accessible for founders of color, and really helping VCs to understand that they're missing critical returns as well when they're not investing in diverse founders. There's about, statistically, a 30% higher return at exit for VC-backed firms led by founders of color. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. How about you, Joelle?
So I wanna begin by backing us up, because they always say, especially in diversity, equity, and inclusion, find your why and you're gonna find your way. And a long time, we've been working towards these goals. And the thing that keeps me up at night and gets me going in the morning is, how is it that, particularly looking at the Latino community, that we could grow as rapidly as we have since 1990, be worth $3 trillion each year in a GDP, and if that were calculated as an independent country, be the 5th largest GDP in the world and the 3rd fastest growing GDP in the world. How could it be that we're responsible for opening 86% of all new businesses since the last recession, but yet less than 9% of those businesses will ever turn into anything bigger than a sole proprietorship? And you have to wonder, why is that? What is the why that's causing some of these pain points? And we started the Latino Leadership Institute 10 years ago to solve some of the whys, but we had to really do some exploration. The first thing that we understood is that diversity, equity, and inclusion work, we have to remember, started a generation ago. You know, we spent 300 years under slavery, 99 years under segregation, and it wasn't until we began to have some of these laws and Supreme Court cases in the late 1950s into the mid-1960s. Now here's the problem. The basis of DE&I work in the 1960s was fear-based, meaning that you had to implement strategies, you had to deploy tactics so that you didn't get in trouble because of the new laws that were mandated, that were protecting people around things like EEOC. And the very strategies that companies and organizations and banks and a lot of folks today are deploying are those same strategies that could be found at the Kennedy Library in what's called the Plans for Progress, which set the fundamentals. That plan was written by a group of 13 men, all but one was white. Many of the DE&I strategies today don't actually address the pain points of the individuals who are going through to everything that you're talking about. Our starting line is so far back, the barriers are real, they're systematic, and they are internalized. So at the LLI, we went with the research and we said, what can we do to actually change outcomes? And we have to have a two-pronged approach. One, we have to impact at the individual level. When I show up to work every day as a leader, I carry all of that stuff in my invisible backpack. And all of the strategies that are designed to clear the pathway weren't designed by me, and they definitely weren't designed for me. So we built a program called Ignite that is a national program that we offer in public cohorts, but also embedded directly into ERGs and BRGs across the country. Because we developed a leadership development program with our experiences to address the systemic barriers that we face. Things like identity. Things like, can I show up with my big earrings and my red lipstick? And is that going to be seen as something that's going to curtail my career? We have to address those things. You're not going to fix us. We don't need to be fixed, by the way. But we have to work through some of these things. The second thing we did is, until we build wealth and until we have equity and advancement and can make our own investments, we are still pawns in someone else's game. That is never going to get us to a point where we are actually included in the economy, let alone benefiting from it. In order to build wealth, we have to build businesses. So we designed and executed a Latino Entrepreneur Access Program. There's great work being done in the startup space. What's not happening is, how do we take those $1 to $5 million a year businesses and grow them to 10, 20, and 30? Yes. Because that is when we actually begin to develop wealth. And the final piece is, how are we going to leverage technology? Because Anthony spoke to this. The number one barrier to our success and really getting to DE&I, whether it's through venture capital, building businesses, creating a track to CEOs, is we don't have the country clubs. We have to develop our own social capital, our professional capital of sponsors, peers, networks, supporters, and we have to do that in a culturally contextualized way, and that's what the LLI is building right now.
Or build our own, or build our own panel sessions to talk about
That's what we
this.
have you for.
Let's hear from Frances.
So I'm taking this from a different perspective, and I just love the fact that we have all of these resources specifically in Colorado. I'm remiss if I didn't ask, how many of you are in Colorado, staying in Colorado, interested in doing business in Colorado? Great, great, great. So then we'll kind of tailor some of what we say about SBA and what we do here in Colorado. I thought being such a diverse state and having such a diversity of different types of businesses and regions and industries, rural, women-owned, minority-owned, all of that we would knock it out of the park during the pandemic in terms of making sure that people had the information, the resources that they needed, not at that time to start and grow, which is normally our mantra at the SBA. We're the only federal agency whose primary mission it is to help small businesses start, grow, and expand. And then the final piece of that is recover. And so I think in that recover stage, it really revealed where we had all of our gaps and where, quite frankly, we failed. Even in Colorado, thinking that we had the corner on every diversity chamber that could spread information and every partnership and every collaboration, and knowing Jessica and her networks and knowing Joelle and her networks, and still we left people behind. And that was systemic throughout the whole U.S. federal government. And so that is something that we had to fix. I am not a member of Congress. I'm a humble implementer at the federal government agency level in a field office, but I am proud to say that this administration and the White House, recognizing all the gaps in access to programs and resources and things to just survive the pandemic, actually issued an executive order, a very ambitious government-wide equity plan that 25 different federal agencies had to respond to and write and create pillars and goals, and how we were going to address the disparities and the gap in how we were treating underserved communities and how they experienced even access to our resources and all of our programs. And so we developed we're part of an equity plan. If you love reading the weeds and policy type stuff, we can make sure that you get an access to that. It's 17 pages, and SBA is committed to updating it every year. So you don't just know the goals, you also know what are some of the objectives that we have achieved, what is our progress over the year. But in essence, it was 4 basic goals. One of them is that underserved communities don't have access to capital or equitable information even to get access to capital. And so what do we need to do to make sure that happens? We can't change your credit scores, and some of the things that are the hard 5 C's of credit when you're going to try to get loans or funds to help you survive. But what we can help you do is get you prepared to do some more education and reach into communities to make sure you understand the values of whatever's going on in financial literacy world. And then secondly, to create systems and matchmaking to community and financial institutions that are, no offense to our bankers on the board, but that are mission-based. And what they really care about is not necessarily the number of deposits that you put in the bank that offset the loans. What they care about is the economic driver aspect of what you're doing. So you are, an economic powerhouse in the community. You create jobs. You're the ones whose revenues turn back around and support the communities. You're the ones who support the little leagues and everything thereafter. And so it's in our best interest and in the economic interest of the United States to support you. So these mission-based lenders, that's their bread and butter. But how are we matching people to those community financial institutions? And then what are we doing on the other side to make sure that community financial institutions have the support they need to survive? Because they're undercapitalized as well. So that's one of the main goals that SBA is working on. Also, helping to prepare small businesses to have access to traditional means of capital, whether that's commercial lending straight through the bank, or whether it's going through our mission-based lenders or going through our guaranteed loan programs. So that's goal number 1. Goal number 2 is I don't know if you know this, but Uncle Sam is the biggest buyer of goods and supplies in the United States. They spend a little over $600 billion every year. And underrepresented communities are not getting their fair share. It's bore out in the contracts that you can see that are in what we call set-asides. So every year the federal government has to set aside a percentage of its spend that has to go towards set-asides for small businesses and socially and economically disadvantaged businesses. And they come in different colors and flavors in terms of the certification to get access to sole sourcing. But basically what it is to help level the playing field so that small businesses have an access of their fair share of the federal spend. And so we have a scorecard that kind of grades all of these federal agencies. And in going back, you can see that clearly there may be a great number of certified businesses under social and economically disadvantaged programs, but are they getting the contracts? And furthermore, they might not even be able to scale to be large enough to get to be a prime contractor, so to get a direct contract. But the old rules in the federal acquisition regulations didn't even give them credit for being a subcontractor, so that you could have that experience to be able to prove to DOD or whomever is buying something. And you know, the federal government buys everything from toilet paper to drones. So you can see the space that's in there and the availability of revenues or expanding your business if you were to do business with the federal government. So what we're doing is helping create a better pipeline to educate and train small businesses on the value of certifications, and then furthermore to help them get those certifications and teach them how to do business with the federal government. And then the law did change that tweaked that'll allow subcontracting to count as experience. So if you're a plumber that's working on a big project that Kiewit is doing, then you get experience as a federal contractor, which you were lacking in the past. And then the third goal I'll talk about is just providing more support and expanded access to disaster assistance. So, you know, a lot of people went through the PPP loan process and the COVID EIDL loan process and all of that just to help their, even pandemic unemployment, to help themselves, their families, their businesses survive. But we didn't give them much of a runway. Kind of Congress, you know, put the CARES Act out and the Recovery Act out, and we were building the plane as we were trying to fly it. So we learned a lot of hard lessons about what it really takes to get the information out to the people who need it. So we're expanding our networks of collaborations and partnerships and strategic alliances with organizations that are grassroots to make sure that there's navigation to help bring some of those communities, whether they're immigrant communities or refugee communities or people who were, you know, in the dark and didn't want to approach the federal government directly, so we want to do that from trusted partners. One of them's in the room right now. I just even want to recognize her. This is Frances Williams. She's the director of Mi Casa Women's Business Center here in Colorado, and they did a wonderful job helping us that and continue to help us do that.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think we can all agree that if we were in business through the pandemic, we all reached out to the SBA in one way or another. We were all touched by some of the services they offer. So that's why I thought it was important to have their perspective here on the panel. We've heard so far about tools and strategies, but I think all panelists agreed that it really comes down to the roots and is deeper than that. So now we're going to talk about some core values and what it takes to build those inclusive teams and provide access. And I strategically picked Aimara and Andrea to answer these questions because sometimes it's more difficult to see really what is needed when we're looking from the inside out. And so they will offer their perspective from the outside in. And I want you guys to, or you women to share in terms of building inclusive teams and communities, what role does leadership play and what advice can you offer to other organizations looking to develop inclusive teams?
All right. First of all, I think it's important to kind of give you a little bit of context at like where my experience lies with this. So like Anthony was saying, my firsthand experience with this space was actually as a founder. As a startup founder that was very fortunate to have been VC backed. I think I'm blanking on the stat, but in 2015, we were one of only 15 Latinas that had ever raised more than $1 million from VCs, which yay, but also
Give it a
how
head.
sad.
And also, I want to do a quick parenthesis. Andrea, with her company, was also the winner of the pitch competition in 2014 for Denver Startup Week. So
Yes.
give her a round of applause, because Latina and a female, and she was able to actually win that competition, which is amazing.
And it's funny because all of the collateral for this week still has our picture on it. So you'd think they would have had other people to choose from by now. But yeah, I think that context is really important, because it was one of those moments where I didn't know what I was getting myself into until I was in it. And without a background in technology, I ended up in the tech startup space. My background was in fashion. It's a long story of how I ended up here. But it was very clear to me from the second that I walked into not even a room, like the space, a conference, to realize that there were very few people that looked like I did, that had the same experiences as I did, or anybody else that I could actually relate to. And so what I've called this feeling, and I think some of you all might relate to this, is I called it trying to figure out how to get through transparent walls. And what I mean by that is I could see exactly where I needed to go, what I needed to do, but the walls were still there. And a lot of it is what all these amazing panelists are talking about, which is the inherent systemic racism that exists across every single system, industry, and workplace. And it's almost unavoidable without being very conscious of what it is that you are doing, building, and how your actions do have a reaction. So I think something that we took to heart, and your question was around leadership, is even as a VC-backed company at that time, we actually gained a lot of power by being leaders of an organization. And so knowing that, and knowing our own experience, it was funny, I felt like we were doing DEI in tech before that was cool. But we wanted to find Latina engineers, we wanted to find women engineers, we wanted to build a very diverse team that did look like us, because that was our target customer also. And it was really, really eye-opening how a lot of investors did question that many times. Why didn't you hire this other software engineer? And I was like, no, we really wanted to hire this woman engineer. And so I think part of being a leader, and even though fundraising was not a position of power that we had, we did have power over how we built our organization, who we hired, how we actually were able to hear them. And so something that I'm now doing in my current role is Common Future is a nonprofit that exists to close the racial wealth gap in the US, which is a big task. And the more I see and the more I uncover, the more I'm a little bit like, thank goodness all these humans are here, because it's gonna be an uphill battle. But part of what I've realized is that there's actually now there's so many interesting things that you can do as a leader. It's about who you hire. It's about how you hire. It's living wages. That's something that you, as the owner of your organization, can 100% control. And I've heard a lot of founders say, well, how do I get my investors on board? Or how, build it in. Like if this is something that is actually meaningful to you as a founder and as a leader of an organization, sole proprietor or a team-led one, you do have influence over the economy, and it starts with yourself and it starts with your team. And so don't underestimate the fact that you can build it into your strategy. If it means something to you, build it in, create KPIs and goals around it, and invest in it. And I think most people have already said that. If you don't invest in it, you're speaking through your actions, right? And so those are some things that we took to heart and we got backlash on often, but we did it anyways. And there's a stat that says that diverse teams actually outperform their competitors by over 35%. Gender diverse teams outperform their competitors by 15%. And so it's like the data is there, but it is still an uphill battle. Like, I don't want to sit here and say this is going to be easy. It takes a lot of commitment and strategy and really embracing those goals that you have, because there's a lot of influence that you can have for others and for the economy as a whole. But
Can we just clap?
Thank you.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Here you go.
Are you okay if I don't use the mic?
I think because they're recording, they are wanting us to.
How about now? Can everybody hear me? Awesome. Well, I just want to take a second to shout everyone on this panel out, because I think so many of the insights that are being shared are so fundamental to how we think about DEI work today. And, similar to the story that she was sharing, I do not create legislation or policy at a higher level, but I'm like a community builder is what I like to say. I'm first generation. My parents are from Honduras. I'm originally from New York and relocated to Denver about 2 years ago. And one of the main things that I always think about is the head and the tail, right? To really create change, you need to have people at the local, federal level really thinking strategically about how are we removing these barriers to entry? How are we creating an honest and transparent dialogue about the inherent and systemic racism that has been at the foundation of this country for years? But at a local level, you really need people who are kind of taking the responsibility to help shape and create locally the changes that we need to see. And so one of the organizations that I'm a part of, which is called Latinas in Tech, is a 501c3 organization that's dedicated to empowering the Latino community. We started focusing on technology, and it quickly grew into something that is industry agnostic. And for me personally, I spend a lot of time thinking about this concept of earned privilege. I think everyone on this stage has earned a level of privilege that we've all worked for, which is fundamentally different than being given privilege just because of what you look like, right? And I think because of that, it is really important, whether you're building an organization, you are hosting events, you're a founder that's looking for connections, to take it upon yourself to first and foremost acknowledge, I have value. I may not know all the things I need to know at this time. I may not have access to all the things I'm going to need access to get to the next level, but it doesn't mean that I should not continue my fight and my pursuit to go out and seek those things and find those things. Because I will say, and I think every single person on this panel has touched on this, I didn't go to college. I didn't have the opportunity nor the finances to do so. I have really never had any guidance early on in my career because I was the first in my family to do this. So I couldn't, go to my parents and say, how would you approach XYZ situation? Or how should I handle XYZ situation that I'm currently facing? And it is because of that I've made it my core mission to really support any type of professional that's looking to get to the next level. Because at a high level federally, right, there's a lot of work to do. I'm not the best person to essentially speak on that, but nothing else happens if we don't start to then trickle down that impact at the highest level into our local community, so that we're increasing awareness, we're increasing equity, and we're calling it for what it is. I don't know if it's because I've been in this game for a little while or because I'm from New York, but we still have a lot of work to do. And if the DEI approach is going to be another marketing campaign or another declaration that's made, we don't want it, we don't need it, we really need change. And people that are invested in supporting that. And I think everyone here today can contribute to that in your own way, right? If you are a manager, if you see individuals on your team that need support or maybe have a learning curve to some of the skills or projects that you're working on, take the time to, invest in them and really ensure that they're learning what they need to learn to excel as best as possible. If you're building a company, first thing you always need to remember is, what is the conviction that I have attached to this, and what is the value that I'm looking to create? And I really love the fact that you double tapped on, we are a diverse team looking to build a solution for diverse demographics, right? At the end of the day, what we have is the ability to know what are the lived experiences of our communities, what are the challenges that we're facing and the barriers to entry to exist. The more of us that start to talk about that, the more of us that try to work to remove those, the more opportunity that we create for that change to slowly and surely happen. And so I think to your question, Jessica, leadership is instrumental. You don't have to be a literal leader in terms of it being in your job description. Giving people who have traditionally have not been given the space and the onus to be in these environments, take it as an opportunity to say, you know what? Let me step out of the way. Let me make sure that this individual can step into their power. But remember, your power exists. No one's going to give you that. What you need to do is take it and run with it, because the more of us that do that, like this wonderful panel today, the more that the dialogue will start to shift and individuals culturally and societally understand DEI isn't new. DEI isn't something that's trendy. We are people, we have lived experiences, and if you're not down with that, then get out of our way so the people that are can create the change they need to create.
Thank you. These are all very profound remarks that we've heard from each one of the panelists, and I had more questions prepared for them, but in lieu of time, I don't want to be preaching to the choir, so I want to actually make this or engage in a dynamic discussion. So instead of going through my questions, I appreciate you all being here, and I want to open up the floor to engage in a discussion, and I want to give you all an opportunity to ask questions if you have of the panelists. So if you do, please raise your hand and we can go from there. And I think, yes, let me. Is it on?
It's okay. Hello. My name is Samaya, and I do diversity and inclusion work. I wanted to know, so one of the big reasons I got into DEI is just passion, right? But I also started working hand in hand with some white men that do diversity inclusion work for a couple reasons. Is because I'd walk into titles like this and I'd see an audience that looks like this, right? Where it is full of people who are people from underrepresented groups or historically excluded groups. I guess my question is, what would you say to the audience as well as things that you've done to get people with power and privilege involved in these things? And I also don't want to denote that people in here don't have power and privilege, because just because I'm an African-American woman, there are African-American people who are homophobic, who don't like Latinos, right? So just because we represent an underrepresented group doesn't mean we're free of our own biases as well. But like, how do you engage in your respective roles or whatever, and just like engaging people who have the most power to make changes, to get involved in these discussions, to your point, because we do preach to the choir quite a bit, right? Or we're speaking to people who are marginalized and telling them that it's up to you to do more, right? And it's a burden that many people carry.
Yes, who wants to take on that question? Okay, Joelle, go ahead.
That's what I do every day. I spend every day of my life trying to explain to those in power why they are both part of the problem and absolutely essential for the solution. And to give you a statistic, I was a global trainer. Part of what the LLI did was work on executive leadership teams and work with executive leadership teams, the decision makers, because if they don't buy in and they don't make the investment, what happens is your chief D&I officer or someone like that, very few founders are in a position to actually make the leadership reflective of their market. That doesn't exist in especially corporate America. And so I polled these folks, these CEOs that have been CEOs for a very long time. Of all of the hundreds of CEOs that we worked with at the Latino Leadership Institute, 70% of them had never actually gone through any of the DE&I trainings that they have implemented throughout their companies. So part of the solution in this is that you really have to gain awareness at the highest levels. We need more founders that have your background, that have your understanding, that can build businesses like that. And we've got to course correct on the other side of the house, because the reality is they don't know what they don't know. And what I'm telling you is they don't know a lot. And that is the reality. And they don't invest financially into the work either. They will put it up on their website as this is one of our foundational pillars. It may even be, I will ask for their governance. I will ask for their bylaws. I will ask for documentation before we partner with them, because if they don't have a financial line item that matches the statements of DE&I that they're putting on their website, at the end of the day, it's just a marketing ploy. It's not a strategy. Strategies require investment, and investments get made multiple times over if the folks at the top are actually involved and aware of what problems they're trying to solve and what opportunities. The final thing is, especially in business, and that's what we all are, yes, there's a social good to this work, there's no doubt. This is an economic vitality matter. If we do not close the wealth gap, the opportunity gap, if we don't actually achieve diversity, equity, and inclusion, the economy is at risk, especially as we become more diverse. And fourth and finally, we have to rally together more than ever before. After the Supreme Court case on affirmative action, which looked at a very small, if you read some of the responses that came in thereafter, we are seeing attacks on VCs that are and were created to support communities that were underinvested in. They're now being challenged and having to put court cases. Our corporate partners that have been on the DE&I track for a while are starting to pull back out of fear, because now there are questions of whether DE&I is even legal and whether we can actually have ERGs and BRGs. The headwinds are real, and there's another fight around the corner, and these types of conversations are more important than ever.
Thank you. Yes, let me say one thing. I think that you hit the nail on the head. Strategies not only require that, but they also need to be result-oriented, and they need to have metrics to measure those results. And I think it's not just about talking about it, it's being about it and measuring that success of those strategies. So I think you're completely right. It's not just putting it on the website, but actually having actionable items. Somebody else wanted to?
I have a quick suggestion, and it's very basic, but I think it dovetails nicely with what Joelle said, because when she talked about the number of CEOs who are not attending their own DE&I stuff, in my experience, what I find is they're not attending because they're afraid. They don't want the fingers pointed at them. They don't want to feel the guilt. They don't understand what to do with the guilt. It goes on, and this is perpetuated in a lot of ways, and often it results in people of color being our own worst enemies. A quick story, and hopefully there was nobody in this room except for Jessica, because I'm not trying to rat anybody out, but we were at a board retreat recently, and somebody was talking about the fact that the organization had removed the word equity from its mission statement, or from one of the program's mission statement. And I said, excuse me, why did we do that? What was the logic behind that? And one of the people on the board who was on the committee, and by the way, she was a black female, said, well, we were afraid it was triggering for some people. To which I responded, I'm sorry, triggering for white people? I don't think that works. So this fear is real, and I also have some colleagues who do the same thing. They pander to the white leadership because they don't want to alienate them. The word alienate comes up a lot. If we scare them, they won't support us. If we alienate them, they won't support us. I totally get that rationale. So one thing that I do, and nobody else has to do it, and I welcome comments after the session, but one thing that I do that seems to break through that and at least gets us to a point where we can have a conversation is I talk about the fact that racism is inherent in every system in the country. I say I'm not going to argue with you about that point. If you disagree with it, we don't have a conversation, but if you do, name me one system in this country that isn't fraught with racism. Okay, well, all of those systems were founded 400 years ago. None of us were alive. So we're not pointing fingers at anybody, not your ancestors, not our ancestors. This is a problem that started way before we got here, but now we're charged with solving it. We have the opportunity to solve it. So can we have a conversation about it? I also say that because racism is inherent in every system in this country, that each of us, whether knowingly or not, or whether we want to realize it or not, are both victims and perpetrators of racism, right? Every system you've used, if you've either benefited from it or taken a benefit from someone else, it's inescapable, right? So that kind of levels the, I don't know if that's true or not, I don't know if people will agree with it, but I tell you, it disarms folks and it opens them up to a conversation that sounds more like, okay, what do we do collectively to solve this problem? Not how do I apologize for stuff that I couldn't do, that I didn't know. I chose my house because it was a good neighborhood, that kind of thing. It completely wipes that stuff away. Just a suggestion.
Jessica, question.
We actually are out of time. I'm sorry. I think we can all agree that an hour is just not enough for this subject. And unfortunately, we are out of time. But most of our panelists will be able to stick around for a few minutes after the fact. So you guys can tap with them and check and definitely connect with them. And, at least we got an hour, right? Let's look at the positive. We can all agree this is more profound than just 1 hour panel. But what an inspiring and enlightening journey that we embark here today. And hopefully this will only be the beginning to many more conversations. Our session has been a testament of the power of collaboration, inclusivity, and shared knowledge. I want to express my sincere gratitude to each and every one of you for being here, being part of this discussion. Your presence, your insights have enriched our conversation and made this session truly exceptional. Let's give it a round of applause for our panelists. As we conclude, let's reflect on a few takeaways. Inclusivity matters, right? We've explored the significance of inclusive cultures, teams, and communities. Access and representation are not just ideals, but a catalyst for innovation, productivity, and collective success. Diversity celebrated. We have to celebrate diversity. Our discussions have enlightened the power of celebrating diversity as a driver of creating creativity and progress. And then we also have actually some actionable insights that we heard from our panelists that we can all implement on our day-to-day lives. We share strategies where environments can, to create environments where the full potential of individuals and communities can all thrive. And then connections, stay for after the session. So the connections that you make here today are valuable resources. Make sure that you nurture them. Inclusivity fosters strong networks, and that's been proven. Remember that inclusivity is not just a buzzword anymore, those words. It's actually a transformative force. The challenges that we face are opportunities in disguise, and the path ahead is illuminated by the wisdom you've gained here today. So now I have, and I'm gonna put it up here, I have a simple but very profound call of action. So be the change makers, be the advocates for inclusivity, and lead by example in your teams, businesses, and communities. Thank you for being a part of this essential conversation. Our commitment of inclusivity is the driving force for future change. Together, we can build a future where inclusivity is not just a goal, but actually the norm. So here's to a future filled with endless possibilities. Thank you all.